Well, hello, everyone. Welcome again to Just Talk Live. And Destiny, where are you?
You gonna put me out there like that, Lee? No, I'm just playing. I am trying to do a little bit of vacation. I'm in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, so I'm very close to you, but not close to you at the same time. Actually,
Yeah,
probably the same distance from Louisville.
yeah, you're about 3 hours away. Tennessee is
Okay.
very. I am in Nashville, Tennessee, and Tennessee is a very long state. So Destiny is about 3 hours away.
Oh, but
But
I'm
it
in your
looks
state though.
wonderful.
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
enjoying my time. Well, somewhat. Still working, but a nice change of scenery in
it
the
looks
city.
very beautiful. Very beautiful out there. I'm
And rocking my
imagining.
Montreats hoodie. Shout
Yeah,
out to Montreat, Camping
I'm
Compass Center.
imagining like a bald eagle flying behind you, some black bears out there. They're not ready to. They're about ready to get ready to
Don't
hibernate,
bring
I
up the
think.
black bears. Yes, let them hibernate. Stay where you
Yeah,
are.
they're beautiful from a distance. But yeah, welcome everybody. We are really excited for the topic of this evening when we're talking about disability and the church. And before we begin a pretty deep conversation about disability in the church, we're going to welcome um, Bethany Fox and Molly Castile to the show to talk a little bit about Bethany's book and a course um, that the Presbyterian Church is offering. So we are going to welcome them right now. So hello, friends.
Hi.
Hello.
How are y'all doing?
Doing pretty good.
Really well.
Thank you for joining us.
Nice
Yeah.
to meet you.
Thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit, Bethany. So Bethany has written a book called Disability and the Way of Jesus. And yeah, tell us a little bit about your book, Bethany.
Sure, yeah. Coincidentally, I happen to have it right here. So
Perfect.
this is what it looks like. Anyway, so this book, Disability and the Way of Jesus, Holistic Healing in the Gospels and the Church. Basically, this is digging into the healing narratives that we find in the Gospels of Jesus interacting with folks and healing them. And the reason I wrote this book is recognizing, over the years as I've gotten more involved in the disability community, recognizing that these texts and the practices that emerge from them are sometimes actually pretty wounding for people with disabilities, both the kind of theological takeaways that people have and the actual practices that come from them in churches. And I'm a super Jesus person. Like, I'm like Jesus all the way. So I was kind of like, this is strange that people who are trying to follow Jesus and go in the way of Jesus and create practices based on what Jesus did are out there wounding people instead of healing people. So I wanted to kind of dig into those texts some more and see, is there a way we can still take these texts seriously and actually learn from the healing way of Jesus and create theologies and practices rooted very deeply in the way of Jesus that are actually healing for people, particularly people with disabilities who have borne the brunt of these texts being used in kind of unhelpful ways. So that's kind of the gist.
Thank you. And Molly, you are also here with us. And as many of our viewers know, Lee and I also always try to lift up connectional ways how to connect everything that we do back to our denomination and to lift up those ways on how other people in the pews and congregations can get involved. So Molly, can you tell us a little bit, a little snippet about your overall role, but also how it intersects with this juncture?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I am an assistant stado clerk in the Office of the General Assembly with a portfolio of equity and representation, which means that I spend a lot of time talking about equity and inclusion and access the access that has been under-resourced in the Presbyterian Church has been, well, there's many, but one that's particularly under-resourced is disability concerns issues. And so I've been spending a lot of time looking for resources that might help church in all of its contexts, council life and congregations, to kind of connect more faithfully, to include and do ministry with rather than ministry for. It's not an either or, but frequently our expressions are more for than with. And so I've been looking for resources for a long time. And Bethany's book is a rare, Bethany herself is a rare person who kind of spans multiple kind of frames in Bible and church and disability. And her book is that kind of resource. And so we got introduced about a year ago and started talking about the possibilities. And the Office of the General Assembly has a website called Equip, which is leadership learning for the 21st century. It's an online education tool. And today we are launching a short course on disability in the way of Jesus on that Equip course. And your show is one of our ways to let everyone know about that course. Thank you for the link.
Well, first and foremost, congratulations. But either Bethany or Molly, can you tell us a little bit more about what people will expect to see or learn or dive into based off of the course and the modules?
Sure.
You wrote it, so give that to her.
Sure. So it's really kind of like a book discussion course. So it's a way for people to kind of read the book together, and then before each section, there's me giving a little video of like, this is what this section is about. This is how this section works in the whole book. And then some, a reading guide of like, maybe pay attention to these points as you're reading. And then some forum questions so people can kind of come together and reflect together. And this is really like where the meat of the course is. It's really in this discussion piece where people can learn from one another, share what interests them in this topic, where are they coming at it, how do they feel like this works in their own context. Some churches are also using it. So it's an online course that's a kind of go at your own pace. It's not like you have to log in at some specific time, but it's like, it's open now and it will be open for a while. So when you have time, you can kind of go through it. And what some churches are doing too is instead of having their folks participate in the online forums, they're using those questions to do like a book study with their congregation to think about as a congregational community, how can they be more accessible, get rid of some barriers, and share leadership and participation more fully with folks with disabilities. So, and the very last module in the course is, after you've read the whole book, how are you going to live this out in your context? What are some questions you have for other people? What are some ideas for practices you're going to implement? So it's really like a good way for people to be kind of chatting together, getting ideas, enlarging their imaginations for like, how can we do church in a way that really invites everybody to the table as leaders, welcomes people with the fullness of who they are in their bodies and minds and the gifts that they bring. So I'm excited to see it really is based on what people are going to bring to it. So I'm excited for people to kind of dig in and join the conversation.
Yeah, the course is really, what's great about, the asynchronous nature means that folks all over the country and frankly, all over the globe can connect with one another about this context and share their resources and share their perspectives and connections to both the book itself and to one another. We've got some content in there to tag whether there's accessibility issues even in this well thought out course. We want to make sure that we make the adjustments we need to make. We will maybe, it may be Equip has a lot of flexibility in it. And so we might be able, in a couple months, find out that groups of folks want to have specialized discussion forums and things, and we can accommodate those kinds of shifts even in the course. So again, we're pretty excited about it. It's self-enrollment. You don't have to be invited into this course. If you go to the website, create an account, you will be able to log into this course. The book is only available in English right now by the publisher. And so the course is in English because the book is in English. But if the languages, if the book is provided in different languages, we will make the adjustment in the course.
Awesome.
This is free. I feel like, I don't know if we
clear about
that's
that.
Right. So.
That's right. As a part of
for free.
My office is fueled exclusively by per capita income, and therefore, as a reflection of that, these are gifts. These are gifts for the whole church.
Always good to be free. It's always good to have free things. But thank you for giving a little shout out. If the course is available at the website that's flashing up, but it's also in the comments under this video, which is very easily just to click on and take you there. But yeah, we hope you enroll and get this book. I've read about half of it, and it's really good stuff. And so yeah, we hope you get the book and do the course. And so
Lee, Bethany's being modest, but what she didn't know, what we talked about earlier, is that not only did she build this entire course, but you also have a chance, if you partake in this course, to have correspondence with Bethany to ask those deep questions. Bethany, from what I'm told, is going to be active, not saying like every day active, I'm not going to put that straight on her, but active in the chat. So you would have access to the author of the book and the course director of the modules, which is also a rare but enriching opportunity that a lot of programs you don't have access to. So thank you.
Yeah, very true. So we're gonna pivot a little bit, and we're gonna say thank you to Molly. Molly is gonna leave us.
Bye, Molly.
Thank you, Molly, for helping us out to organize this, and also helping out putting together the course and promoting it. So thank you for your work, and we'll definitely see you sometime soon. So thank you for joining us.
Have a great conversation. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Bye, Molly.
And so now we're going to invite our other guests. We're going to be inviting Dee and Letiah on with us. So welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank y'all for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, we are here to have a deeper discussion about disabilities and the church. And I know that Destiny is going to start us off in this conversation.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you to our guests for taking this time to be here with us. Before I ask the first question, I just ask that our new guests introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your ministry context or background.
Yeah. So my name is Reverend Letiah Fraser. I am a pastor in the Church of the Nazarene, and I am a leader in the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival in Kansas. And I'm getting my doctorate of ministry in spiritual formation and disability theology. Oh, I should also say, which is always a weird thing on these sorts of platforms because you can't really tell, but I'm a person with a physical disability, so I have cerebral palsy.
Cool. And my name is B. Actually, Rosalba. I'm going to pronounce it the way it's actually pronounced. Rosalba B. Rios. I'm actually working right now in county mental health. I'm a therapist. I also have a master's in theology from Fuller Theological Seminary and a bachelor's degree in fine arts. So I do a little bit of visual art. on the side. I am a person with a physical disability. You can't really see it, but I'm in a wheelchair, and I have a neuromuscular disease. So that's why I have a physical disability. And I'm also a Mexican immigrant. So that's another big part of my identity.
Thank you for sharing. And before we dive deep in discussion, Lee and I always like to take the opportunity to just lay out some ground framework around definitions or terminology. And we talked about it earlier. The question came up directly to me around our title about disabilities and naming it disability, about proper verbiage and language. So I wanted to have a kind of an open dialogue about what language do you feel is correct to use to describe disabilities, or how you would like to be called, and what is some of the negative connotations that people need to stay away from, like the absolutely's do not, because we all have them with our identities. So I wanted to lift that up for you two to share before we dive deeper into our conversation around that.
Yeah, I would say it's a matter of personal identity, right? So some people use different language based on how they would like to be identified, and that's with a lot of different diversities. So for me, I use the word disability in contexts like these, and in contexts where I know that there's going to be a mixed crowd of people, so people with and without disabilities. I'll use the word disability as a way to reclaim it, because it's for some reason have gotten like this negative connotation. Like, I have a disability and it's a positive thing and I'm proud of it. And in other contexts where I know it's just people who would identify with disabilities, I sometimes use the word crippled, and we make jokes because we understand each other's experience, but not language I would use outside of that. And words that I stay away from or are handicapped is really one of those words for me that I don't like, and anything that would be derogatory, which could be any word, right? And if you're not sure, I would prefer that you just call me by my name. Like, yeah. So that's it. That's all I was saying.
You know what I was thinking, as you were talking, Letiah, identity, you nailed it. It's really part of, for example, as a therapist, like, you have different developmental types of models. And the only one that I'm familiar with is called Gibson Model of Disability, which is pretty new. And I think the acquisition of disability, I think, may play into the type of language that you use. So for people that acquire injuries, let's say later in life, what I, just from observation, I've noticed that they're more hesitant to use the word disability because of the stigma that is around that word, versus people like myself who, I was born like this. It's always been part of my journey. And so for me, it was, easier to reclaim the word. And so so I'm pretty open about it. And when people refer to me in terms of like differently abled, or there's like other terms like that, I usually quote unquote educate them. I let them know that disability is the term that I like, and why. Because it's not a negative thing. It's actually just part of an identity. So that's my take on why I prefer the word.
Yeah, and I'm glad we started off this conversation in that framework, and that explaining, that this is very contextual when it comes to identity, and I also want to kind of frame this in saying that we are going to be discussing something we call something that we term as ableism, and many people might not realize what that means either. When we say ableism, that we are perpetuating ableism, and so I'm wondering if we can also kind of frame that for people when we use the word ableist or ableism, what we mean by that.
Yeah, so I think it's the preference for people without disabilities, and it's also uh, being aware of the ways in which society and structures are suited for people without disabilities. So it's built into our very society in the same way or in similar ways as our society can also be racist or white supremacist, right? So it's not that you don't necessarily don't like me personally, but the society is built in ways that are not accessible to me.
Yeah. I honestly don't know the formal term, but I can definitely testify to what it feels like. You know, you grow up with, I mean, this is just me. I grew up with the sense of knowing that it is a negative, you know, ever since I was a young child. And then back when I was younger, I strived. I know it's kind of odd because I'm in a wheelchair and so visible, but in my mind, it's almost like I wanted to deny the fact that I was disabled and strived to appear not disabled, whatever that means. And at that point, I was working at a Christian university at the time, after undergrad, and my coworker said this to me. She said, "I look at you and I forget that you have a disability." And at that moment, I was like in my 20s, and at the moment, I remember feeling like proud. I was like, "Yeah." She doesn't see me as such, but now that I look back on it, I realize that is such a shame. You know, that we like society has this negative view. I get what she was trying to say. Like her view of disability was such that I didn't fit the mold. So I'm assuming that her view about it was a negative one. So yeah, for me, I feel like it's been a lifelong experience in accepting and embracing, but part of it is because of the awareness of the ableism that exists.
Yeah, thank you for lifting that up. And Lee, thank you for that question, to lay down some of the terminology that we might be using throughout this talk and discussion here today. Since we are focused on ableism, we gave a platform or context for the definition. I want to know personally and on a broader scale, with some of the policies that you have seen, or even theology, how has the church promote ableism in the context that you live in and that you see and experience on a day-to-day basis? And Bethany, of course, we welcome you to join the conversation as well, whenever you feel need to.
I think if you look historically, churches petitioned to get out of applying the ADA, so that's historic. And then if you look structurally in most churches, if they have physical access into the entrance, I question sometimes whether the people in the church see me as someone who can participate and not as a leader. So, like most churches, I'm a pastor, but I have to think of creative ways on how to access the pulpit, right? Because if there's stairs, maybe I can't get up them because they're too narrow or they don't have a banister. So there's not a vision even of having a pastor that has a visible disability. I know that there are pastors that have invisible disabilities just because I know the wide span of people that have disabilities, but having an image of a pastor that has a physical disability sometimes doesn't even cross the mind of others. And then I remember when I was first starting seminary, I did a survey in the church I went to, and I said, would you feel comfortable having a person with a disability as a pastor? And overwhelmingly, the answer was no. Because there's this sense that the life that I live is so other, right, than people that don't have disabilities. And I just, that baffles me because we live in the same world. And often I have to think about things that people with disabilities don't do.
Yeah. I think, I mean, and this would be more like more theological, but I think, yeah, like churches do too, ADA, it's already built in to some extent, not always, but there's an assumption that if you abide by ADA code, especially if the building was built, after 1991, and that somehow meets criteria for accessibility. Where I appreciate, Bethany's book is the really unpacking the theology underneath, and what does it mean, as the body of Christ. So I think that theological framework is really important to understand in order, because everything branches out from that. Even the way that we structure our buildings, or the way that we create spaces that are inclusive, but if we only view, which unfortunately that's more of a broader, a broader, I don't know if it's philosophy, but that disability is only, it's only equivalent, or accessibility is only equivalent to structural or what the ADA mandates. Outside of that, we really don't unpack the philosophy behind it, and the construct, and the stereotypes and prejudice underneath that, the ableism. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts about it.
Yeah, I want to throw in a couple of things, particularly thinking about folks with who are neurodiverse or have intellectual disabilities.
Yeah.
Those don't always overlap, but sometimes they do. And so I started this church, Beloved Everybody Church, that is intentionally welcoming the leadership and participation of people with and without intellectual disability and other kinds of disabilities and neurodiversity. But part of that is in thinking about how our church is structured. And this is, different denominations and traditions and churches are different in this way, but there tends to be a real word heaviness to like how we worship. There's like sometimes worship is like you kind of just sit back passively and a wall of words falls on you. And that just isn't really accessible to a lot of folks. It doesn't actually create pathways for discipleship. It doesn't really help people learn about Jesus just to kind of be sitting passively getting a bunch of words. And so there's a way that faith can be presented in a really wordy, cerebral way. And I think that's a way of ableism within our church, because it's a way we're not inviting certain people into discipleship and saying, like, we actually think you have gifts to contribute to the community. And that goes along with, I appreciated what Letiah said about how sometimes church buildings are accessible, but then the leadership platform is inaccessible. And what does that say? I think bringing that up is really important, because it's also a question of who do we give the mic to. And it was one really funny, I talk about this in the book, but one really funny interview I had with a church. And this was a church that was like on it in terms of justice issues for the most part. And I was talking to them about disability, and they mentioned that they wanted to try to make their church more wheelchair accessible. And so what they did was have their senior leadership team all use wheelchairs for a week to like see how it could be better. This is the thing. So they had people who used wheelchairs regularly in their congregation. So they could have like asked, how can we make it more accessible, you know? And yet they like put the senior leadership in wheelchairs for a week, and that's a way of just like not trusting the experience and voices of people with disabilities in your community to be the leaders and to like, you know. So anyway, I'm sure I heard Letiah chuckle and be too, because it's like it seems so obvious, but like this kind of thing, like these are well-intentioned people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what happens?
I went to a church, Bethany, that did that as part. I mean, I didn't go. I visited a couple of times, and they would do that. They would, they would do like a wheelchair week awareness, and so what they would do is they would put a bunch of like teens gosh, teens. So they would put like a bunch of teens in wheelchairs, and they would like for the day, and they would like stroll around the mall, and I get it. It was like you said, it was well intentioned, but it didn't really address or capture, or it just, I don't think that's the way to go about it. So anyway,
and I think it's also good to be mindful of other people with other types of disabilities.
Yeah.
So people who are deaf, people who have chemical sensitivities, all these different things that sometimes just doesn't cross people's minds until they either experience it themselves, because it's the people with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group, right? That you can get a disability or have a disability, however you want to say that, at any time in your life. So the more accessible our churches are for everyone, the more likely we're able to age in our churches and don't have to then find a place that would fit us once we're older, or if something happens that then someone requires a disability.
But I think, and the word that comes up is brokenness. I think maybe that is why there's such an aversion to it, even in the church. Like there are aspects of culture that seep into the church, and this is one of them. So just as human beings, we have this aversion to being different or wanting to fit in. And then definitely when it comes to bodily difference, that I think is the reason why. And I'm focusing a little more on like physical disabilities, but I think that is why just innately humans will try to avoid or even because it isn't, for many people it's incredibly uncomfortable, whether they admit it or not. It is. The fact that we're even having this discussion in 2020 and we haven't really moved that far as a society says that, it speaks to that. And so within the church, I think there's either a silence or there is this like charity model, like people are in need and we are only recipients of need, versus seeing us as part of humanity. I mean, it's almost like this very, it's you're not quite in the human spectrum because you're so different. And so even in the church, there's difficulty with knowing what to do with that, other than looking at scripture and seeing all the narratives, the healing narratives. So that's kind of the other side is, the healing is a big component to it. The charity is a big component to it. And that, I don't know if there are statistics about how many people with disabilities are within the church. Many maybe don't want to go because of the theology. Walking into, and feeling on a personal level, I've had too many experiences like that where it feels degrading. It's I can't even put into words what it feels like to be immediately sought out, not as because of me, but because of this perceived idea that I need healing. So I think we really need to unpack the ableism, the theology, the discomfort, the, you know, why is this identity so difficult for people?
Yeah, I mean, I can recount many times going to the altar because I needed to be healed, and then feeling guilty, not because I necessarily didn't get healed. I'm okay with that. Like, that's not a thing for me, but like feeling guilty because the person who is praying for me feels bad. So almost having to like comfort them, like, I'm cool, I was born this way. But and then yeah, that was just an awkward. It's just awkward for everybody. So just don't. And then feeling like sometimes I want to come in the altar, but maybe my concern is like I'm having a bad day. Can you pray that? Like, why are you just assuming that that is the need that I have? Um, and I think that people with disabilities don't come to church because even if we think about the songs that are popular in church, the ways in which pastors talk about people with disabilities, and either this like saintly person or this person in need of help, and not people with disabilities who are empowered even in scripture, because there's a way to read scripture that says that lifts up the voices of people with disabilities.
So. Yeah. Amen, Letiah.
Yeah, and I'm glad Letiah mentioned that in many cases the disability that's the only thing that is seen, and that's the only thing that is acknowledged, and we have right here humanity that encompasses all types of like intersectionalities when it comes to like our gender identity, our sexualities, our race. And I wonder if and when we and oftentimes when we talk about disability, those things are not even on people's minds whatsoever, is this intersectionality of the rest of our embodiment. And so I wonder if you can speak to that as well, because I know B said that a part of you is identifying as an immigrant, a part of you that's a part of your identity. And so I wonder if y'all could speak to that as well, and how that also affects your lives, and how we should also be having these types of conversations.
Definitely. So I've had the opportunity to be bicultural in the sense of, you know, having a disability in a different country. So I was born in Mexico City, and it's a long story how I even arrived here, but I've so I go back every year. My entire family is, except for my immediate family, is in the U.S., and so I travel at least once a year, and it is night and day. It doesn't mean that in the U.S., we're talking about the problems with a cultural framework when it comes to disability. In other countries, there's shame. So, for example, in Spanish, the word disability is not used. It exists, but the way that a lot of times Latinos view disability is sickness. So the way that I hear, and even towards me, is she's sick. And so there's this very clear, it's almost like this symbiotic, identity of like, if you have some sort of physical or anything, any type of disability, you are automatically viewed as sick. So it is really difficult when I go back. Even within my own family, there's like it's draining. I mean, I love my culture. I love all of that, but there are definitely aspects of it that are much more difficult to digest as a person with a disability. Here I'm from Southern California, and I live in a predominantly Latino community. I go to a Spanish-speaking church, and it's similar. It's a similar narrative. You're viewed as a child, perpetual child. And so it is an uphill battle to try to dispel it's oppressive. I mean, to be viewed like that. So that's a little tidbit of like in other cultures. I mean, I'm not gonna claim that I know the way that every culture sees disability, but in other cultures there is this aspect of shame, family shame, if someone has a disability. So it's definitely an identity with high level of oppression throughout the world.
Yeah. In my family, I was always taught like the world will not be ever accessible to you, so you just need to like figure out a different way. I think that there was an unspoken worry about what would become of me in terms of like, would I have a successful life? Um, those sorts of things. And I think that if everybody in my family were honest, I think that there's still some worry about that as I get older in age. And then I think about just my identity as a woman, as an African American, and then as a person with a disability. When I walk into a space, in particular churches or religious spaces, I know that the first thing that people will notice as part of my identity is that I have a disability. So it overshadows all the other aspects of my identity. And I want to say, yes, I'm an African American, and yes, I'm a woman, and yes, all the things that you want in your life, I want to, but my disability overshadows that, and more appropriately, whatever their idea or the group that I'm with, their idea of disability overshadows who I actually am. So there's a lot of like educating, making people feel comfortable. So it's a lot of work, and sometimes I just don't want to do the work for you. I feel like there's enough information out there, and make a friend, and not just for a project, but so that you can actually get to know somebody.
Yeah, I appreciate your words, B and Letiah, because it is very important to have this conversation about disabilities, but also the other identities that you both carry and live through play a big role in how you're treated and how you're viewed, and the access that you even have as a person with disabilities. As you may know, this show, Just Talk Live, is geared to young adults, even though we have a diverse viewing population, but we are focused on young adults. I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit to discuss, one, what is your message to young adults who might have a disability that's viewing this? And also, if there is a person or a young adult who wants to do more of the justice work of advocating for disabilities, how are ways or they can walk alongside the community without being harmful, like rolling around in wheelchairs to figure out, what needs to change? What are some of those ways that can be lifted up without causing more harm? So one, what would you say to a young adult with disabilities? And two, how can young adults walk alongside this community and advocate for disabilities?
So usually, like developmentally, like young adults, like I'm assuming it's like within the 20-year like in their 20s, a college age, that's usually the time where you're, really solidifying your identity, but it's very future focused. So what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do as far as even romantically? What am I going to do? Just, and it seems like a lot of people, and again, I know I sound very like I'm generalizing, but I'm just going to use general terms. Sometimes there could be also a lot of fear because of the challenges, and that encompasses employment, relational independence. Usually, that's a time where you're looking at greater independence, and so depending on the person, those can be sources of high anxiety. So I think just even acknowledging that, most young adults have a lot of questions, anxieties about their future. I think for young adults with disability, that gets heightened exponentially. So it's not uncommon for there to be things. And I know I'm a therapist, so I'm kind of built to think in these terms. That there could be some mental health aftermath because of that. So when I was, my first bout of depression, I was second, was when I was in college because of that, because I was really sifting through who I was and the loss. So I think there is, in some level, there are losses. So, I just want to normalize if someone is listening and, feels that way, that it is, it is okay. I think, personally, I've, went through that as a young adult and continue to struggle at times with those feelings. Secondly, I think that the second question is a little harder for me to think about, like how they can be involved. I don't know if any other of you have any suggestions on how to become involved. But I don't really, like, nothing really comes to mind, unfortunately, like, like organizations or things like that. I don't know if any of you know of any.
So organizations I'm thinking of would be your local centers for independent living could be an option, but also organizations that work, what we call cross-issue organizations, right? So not just organizations that work with people with disabilities, but where you have a variety of different people, different diverse types of people working together, because that's what the world is anyway. And that, I think, in terms of like coming alongside, I just think live your regular life, right? So in the same way, hopefully, young people, and I'm not that old, but younger people would, in the same way you want a diverse friendship in lots of the different ways that diversity exists, that it would also include people with disabilities, whether that be friendship. And I'm thinking about it romantically too. Like that does not need to be off the table just because somebody has a disability. I just need to say that. All right, here we go.
Woo.
I'll add something too. I think in terms of just a message, or what I would think of saying to a young adult with a disability, is partly just, we need you. I mean, as a church, as a community, you have perspectives and experiences and gifts that the church needs. God created you on purpose to be who you are, and we need those gifts. And I want to add to that, it can be hard, coming up against a strong institution that is built a certain way and is used to people, or built for people whose brains and bodies work a certain way. So I will also add that as someone who started a church myself, because I felt that it was going to be a long road try to actually reform a church and make it truly accessible, you can start something new within your denomination, within a church. Feel free to do things your own way and create something from the ground up. It's really hard, but sometimes that might be a possibility. If reformation is also an important work, but you can decide what you feel called to. And sometimes that work, like pushing back against a system, can be really exhausting. And you might want to just say, I want to create something that I can say yes to, that is fully embracing from day one. So please do that. And I also just want to say that anytime you have felt that you were not needed or wanted was a lie. And so just know that you are not a burden. You are not, you are beloved and needed. And we're great. I'm grateful for who God has made you to be. And then for church leaders, just to say, pay attention to the voices of people with disabilities in your community. If you want to be an ally, then don't sit yourself in a wheelchair. Go talk to somebody who's in a wheelchair. If you are not autistic, find someone who's autistic and talk to them about what their experience is like. You likely have people with disabilities in your community, even if you are not aware of it. And pay attention to what they need and their leadership, and know that often folks with disabilities will highlight something that isn't working in a church or in a structure, and they're not the only ones that isn't working for.
That's right.
But we think about it as if we're going to change this for the people with disabilities. But actually, when we change it, it becomes more accessible to the whole community. It becomes another way of engaging that other people also need. And so recognizing that there's a giftedness and a perspective among folks with disabilities in your church that's just going to make your church better if you listen. So listen to that.
Amen.
Yeah. And so we have about 10 minutes left, which will give us plenty of time. We always offer at the end of our show a time for last minute comments that are burning from within, that you feel need to be said that we haven't covered. And so we wanted to offer each one of you some last comments to offer people who are viewing with us.
I think Bethany said it beautifully.
Yeah.
I love that. And you're right. I think just as humans, we need to know that we matter. We're loved and we're made in the image of God just as we are. And, so that I love that. I think that is a beautiful thing to live. I mean, that's essentially what I want to leave with is, and I'm not just speaking to an audience, but also I think to myself, it's a good reminder to remember that we are uniquely made in the image of God, just as we are.
I would say for those people with disabilities that don't know our history, go learn. I mean, we have some amazing people that have disabilities that have improved the lives of everyone, people with and without disabilities. So disability culture is amazing and it's something to be proud of. And so go and make your mark on the world in that same way. And also remember, like, having a disability can be sexy. It's however you make it that way. I mean, just do it.
I have a burning desire to say that B wrote part of something in my book, a reflection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
and also, I'm gonna get your book, but I want it autographed so I can be like, I know her.
We'll talk later. I'll send it.
Okay.
But there's some first-hand narratives of like folks with disabilities reflecting on how the concept of healing has been in their lives and how it's not always been helpful in church contexts, and then how maybe they've learned to think about healing in a way. So anyway, B wrote this really helpful reflection in the book. And if there's ever an updated second version of this book, I'm gonna definitely hit up Letiah to add another section.
I'll just have to write a book and you can be in it. There we go.
I'm into it. I'm into it.
Well, thank y'all all so much for being here. And I hope that maybe one day we can have a part 2 to this, because I think that this conversation always needs to happen. And I think that we need to continue keeping this in front of people always, specifically in the church, which has not always been a healthy space for people with disabilities, but I hope we'll continue to reform to be a healthy space. So we are so blessed to have you here. And Destiny, it's good to see you in the mountains. I'm jealous.
Yes, it's been great. It's been great. You might hear some birds in the background. But yes, and to put a last leaving plug in for Bethany's, not only Bethany's book, but also for the course work and how to really walk alongside the work of the church and how to be intentional in doing it. And of course, like we lifted up earlier, you have access to the author. You can ask Bethany questions. So please take a look at that resource as well. That's one resource that you can use, the book and the modules.
And in the course, just to throw one thing out, there is like a resource list too that I've created of other books and podcasts and articles that might be helpful. And there's also like a community list where anybody who takes the course can add a book or something that's been helpful for them. So there's a chance for you to, hopefully when you kind of start digging into this topic, you're going to want to really like learn a lot more and keep exploring. So there's going to be some options for you to figure out how to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all again. And just for next week, we will be having this will be, I think, his third time on with us. We will have Guthrie Grace Fitzsimmons with us, who just recently wrote a book and it's been published and released about progressive Christianity in America, and how progressive Christians should begin to reclaim a national narrative of what it means to be Christ in our world. And so we will have him with us next week. Just him alone. We haven't had one person in a long time, Destiny. I don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah, I hope he can carry the conversation by himself. Because, I mean, I'm just so used to, like, having awesome people, like, flow off of each other. So be ready. Be ready next week.
Yeah, get ready next week. And thank you again to our guest, Bethany Fox and Reverend Letiah Fraser and B. Rios. We are so thankful that y'all are here with us. You are welcome anytime to be on. So until next time, friends, we will see you next week, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Facebook Live, and we're also on Twitter. So join us next week. So until then.